brought to you by Orbital Assembly Corporation, with your hosts, Dr. Jeff Greenblatt and Eric Ward.
Hello, and welcome back to this week's episode of Our Future in Space. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Greenblatt at Orbital Assembly Corporation, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Eric Ward. How's it going, Eric?
Oh, it's going really well.
Yeah, we have some exciting news to share with you all today. Due to the overwhelming success of our podcast thus far, we've decided to go to a weekly episode release format. So everybody listening should look forward to hearing more about Our Future in Space in the weeks and months that follow. We're also excited to start inviting a wider variety of speakers and topics, as well as mixing up the format a little bit. So you might not be seeing one-on-one interviews quite so much as we experiment with different formats to engage a wider variety of people. Also, we are encouraging people to sign up to become active members of our podcast. And in encouragement of that, we've got a monthly merch giveaway that we're going to start. You might get a hat, you might get a t-shirt or stickers or whatever else we have in the goodie bag that particular month. So, Eric, how do people sign up if they're interested?
Yeah, absolutely. You can just go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel and also join our mailing list through any of the links in the episode description. Email, Twitter, Facebook, all work. So I'm looking forward to more releases and a couple new formats that we're going to try out. So hopefully you guys enjoy Our Future in Space in the coming months. And of course, this episode.
Welcome to Our Future in Space. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Greenblatt, the Vice President for Science and Research at Orbital Assembly Corporation. In this podcast, we explore the technical, economic, social, political, and ethical considerations of moving humanity into the solar system to work, play, and ultimately to live. Our species is at an inflection point in its evolution, where we now have the ability to sustain life off-planet in low Earth orbit and soon throughout the solar system. Do we merely survive, or do we expand outwards and thrive? I'm here with my co-host, Eric Ward, the Vice President for Engineering Design at OAC. How are you doing, Eric?
Oh, I'm doing really good. Thanks, Jeff. We've got one last episode of these composite interviews. Today, it is Andy Aldrin. He's a professor at Embry-Riddle University and the president of the Aldrin Foundation. And we'll also play an interview we had a while ago with Jeffrey Morris from Future Dude Entertainment. I hope you guys enjoy this episode, and next time we'll be back to our regular format.
So I have as my guest today, Dr. Andy Aldrin. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Good to be here.
Dr. Andrew Aldrin is president of the Aldrin Family Foundation, a charitable 501c3 organization dedicated to harnessing the inspiration of space. Dr. Aldrin is also program chair and founder of the Master of Space Operations program at Embry-Riddle University. Before moving into academia, Dr. Aldrin had a distinguished career in industry and government research, including executive positions at Boeing, ULA, and Moon Express. He serves on the board of several charitable organizations, including the Secure World Foundation, Sea Space Symposium, Space for Humanity, and the Tal Zero Foundation.
This is a very, very exciting, but I think perilous time in commercial space. You know, I guess I'm reminded of the Stephen Stills song. I won't even try to sing it, but there's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. And so it is really exciting in the sense that there is a great deal of velocity to events right now, and this is how things happen when the atoms are moving around, so to speak. But there's real risk in the genuine sense of financial risk. Risk has an upside and a downside. And so I think there's just tremendous opportunity in the markets today, but there's also peril. And I think human spaceflight, commercial human spaceflight, is a particularly interesting place. And it gets all the attention, to be absolutely honest with you. We spend all our time thinking about human spaceflight, and there are people that think that's all we do, that is space, which of course isn't true. I mean, the
not by a long shot.
Real space, right, is happening in big constellations And I think actually remote sensing is probably one of the most interesting areas. But, so human spaceflight by comparison, it isn't that large a chunk of the however you want to measure, if we're going to call it a $300 billion or $400 billion economy. I tend to kind of segment the economy into three pieces. There's the infrastructure piece, which is the rockets and stuff we put into space. And then the ground systems, antennas, things like that, GPS chips in your phone. And then there's the applications. And interestingly, those three segments actually break down to about 125 billion each, or maybe it's 130, 140. They're all about the same size. Totally different, absolutely totally different industry dynamics to them in terms of what the financial expectations are of each part of the industry. But we tend to think of infrastructure as the industry. So call that 125, 130 billion dollars. And of that, human spaceflight might be, if you rubbed all the pennies together, let's call it 10, 15 billion dollars. NASA spends $10 billion on human spaceflight alone. And so, and the rest of the world probably doesn't spend more than 5 at the most. I haven't really parsed it out, but so it's pretty much a U.S. government thing. And the commercial segment of that right now is, so, we've had 3 people fly for $50 million. So that's $150 million. And maybe we'll bring that up to 450 or something by the end of the year. And so maybe we get to $500 million out of a $15 billion market. It's not huge yet.
Right.
And one of the things that isn't really clear is what's the big market that's going to drive that. I think because, human spaceflight is very, very expensive. And so when you talk about human spaceflight markets, you've got to be talking about markets that begin with tens of billions of dollars. And we don't know what that is right now. I mean, maybe it's tourism, probably not. There just aren't that many. There aren't that many gigabillionaires out there, which is kind of what you're talking about. You probably have to have hundreds of billions before you start spending. I mean, not hundreds, but certainly tens of billions before you start spending hundreds of millions of dollars going into space. So I don't know if that's the market. I do believe that human habitation, if you call it spaceflight participation, the really interesting thing about it now is because you've got NASA, which is providing a foundation. And if you start, and NASA can reduce the overall cost of human spaceflight to the point where you can do it for only $50 million. And maybe if we get to $1 billion or $2 billion of spaceflight participation, you can start to get to the point where you're cobbling together a transitory market, something that will get us to the capabilities to really understand what you can do in space with commercially operated stations. And that's where the exciting parts of it are, but we don't really know we're in a process of market search right now. And so I think the key to making this whole thing work is you could call it sort of a minimum viable product, but getting something out there to start testing markets, because what an MVP does is it's intended to test a market, to see if you can find somebody that'll buy the product. Now, typically you're talking about can openers and stuff like that cost $5.
Right.
We're talking about stuff that costs hundreds of millions at least to get to an MVP. But I think what's important and what I understand about orbital assembly that's important is that orbital assembly is trying to get to that MVP more quickly than anyone else. And I think if you can get out there and you can demonstrate that there is a market and you can keep government out of the way, then we'll find out. And getting to that market first probably has advantages. But to be perfectly honest, if you look at the sort of history of innovation, first movers it's not that they do worse than second movers, but they don't necessarily win. I mean, usually what happens is the fast second movers, first mover, basically, it's a tough market, but you can acquire a niche in that market. So that's what excites me about orbital assembly, is that the opportunity to be first to that market without the challenge of NASA, because NASA is going to I'm not going to say impose requirement. NASA legitimately needs things that cost a lot of money. And NASA is an important, very sometimes pivotal market participants. And so companies that are working for NASA are going to make sure that they meet NASA's requirements and negotiate those requirements. But all that takes time. And so I think there's an opportunity presented by not working with NASA that is really exciting. And so I'm looking forward to seeing companies like Orbital Assembly get out there and figure out if there is really a market out there. And then we'll see. And so it's exciting, but it's going to be exciting in both ways. I mean, this sort of, I'm reminded of the saying, "May you live in interesting times." That of course is a Chinese curse, but I think it's an American blessing. And so we will be living in interesting times in human spaceflight, to be sure.
Yeah, we already are, I think. But yes, the best is yet to come, right? In terms of excitement.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things when we talk about minimum viable products is we sort of have one out there, the space station, but it is certainly minimum.
It's minimum at maximum price.
I don't know if it's viable, though, because the problem is it's challenging to actually test markets in a real way, because it takes a long time to get up there. There's a lot of bureaucracy behind it, sort of between you and actually getting to the station. So I don't know if that's really a good place to test the market. And we've been testing the market, right, for more than 20 years now. We haven't found the killer app.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, what's your opinion of things like ZBland, or
like what?
Or ZBland, the optical fiber that's
don't know yet.
Okay.
I mean, I know of it.
Yeah.
I just don't know is that a $10 billion a year market?
Yeah.
I don't know. But I mean, it's there, and it's not hard to envision a market. The question is just, one is, will someone pay the transportation costs? And the transportation costs are not magically going to go away. They're not magically going to go away.
Well, they're not going to go away, but they probably are going to come down quite a bit.
How much? I mean, if you've got to even if the whole launch vehicle was free, everything was reusable. You still got, let's just pick on SpaceX, because I know something about the number. They've got 9,500 employees, and not many of them are working on Starlink. The number I read was 250 or 300. And so that's not a huge number. So you still got something approaching 9,000 employees working there. You have to pay for them. Right? And so even if the launch vehicle is free, you've got
the overhead
employee costs that I just kind of did a calculation of. I took what we know about what their average pay is and lumped what was a horrifically low overhead rate based on traditional aerospace. And you're still at $1.2 billion. And so somebody has to pay. Somebody has to pay for that $1.2 billion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it has now for several years been argued that it's really about maximizing your capital, your use of expensive capital, right? So if you can launch 100 times in a year with that same number of employees, then you're spreading the cost out over.
Absolutely. Right? Well, it's not not just capital assets, it's more fixed cost. And, and even that the employees aren't, in a traditional sense, aren't really fixed costs, but in the space business, it's you can't just dump employees and find the same people back that know how to launch a rocket.
That's right.
They represent a fixed cost. So you're right. It is entirely a function of rates. And so for SpaceX, Starlink is a wonderful thing, at least from the rate standpoint. What's questionable, what I just wonder about is, who pays for Starlink? Is that for the launches? It all just kind of gets wrapped up in the SpaceX's finances. It's a massive advantage for SpaceX in the constellation business,
because they're paying at cost, which is a lot less than what anybody else pays, I guess.
Well, Well, they can internalize those costs. Let's just put it that way. Without I don't know if the Starlink part of the business actually writes a check to the launch part of the business for launches. They probably don't. But of the 31 launches last year, 19 of them were Starlink, and the rate is phenomenal. But they only had 12 revenue generating launches.
Right.
So anyway.
What else about what we're doing excites you? If there's anything else you would like to highlight?
Well, so I will, because I really don't know a huge amount about the details of your business. Let me couch it of things that I think would be real advantages. If what I think is a good strategy is getting to market as soon as possible and then demonstrating and capturing the early market, I think the key elements are going to be a really streamlined process to get things up there, and cost of entry. Keeping the cost of launching, maintaining your facility as low as possible, and so and it's not just about non-recurring costs, but it's going to be about how do you keep the operations costs of it low enough to really enable some kind of market creation, because that's what you're talking about. So yeah, I think that's an advantage: being fast, being agile, and being inviting to the customer. One of the challenges, though, is a facility which is attractive to the spaceflight participant, well, I'll call it someone who was interested in recreational space.
Okay.
Is that same facility going to be good for what's kind of getting out the minimum viable product to demonstrate industrial space? And so that's a challenge.
The solution we've come up with is it's a multi-use facility that has a modular structure so that you can cordon off different parts of the station for different uses, and you could even have exclusive access. You could even have one of the modules in vacuum if you needed to do those kinds of processes on orbit.
Well,
but it's made to be human rateable throughout. The point is that you can have a reconfigurable space that can be open air, open volume, or partitioned into small cells, with multiple companies doing things in different parts of it, and you could have tourists flying around and kind of like a, Well,
and I think the early tourists are going to be relatively less discriminating. They're just going to want to get into space and get a good view and get selfies and all that kind of stuff. Over time, you'll have to figure out how you design to markets, and I think being very flexible, as it sounds like you are, being able to bring up modules that are tailored to specific market opportunities quickly will be another huge advantage. And staying outside of the government realm will be very helpful.
Yeah, despite their deep pockets, I understand the constraints of having to work with.
Well, it's you've got an opportunity to exploit a very pure strategy, and it's I think for this particular market, because I think the uncertainties are so high, let 100 flowers bloom. That's probably the wrong metaphor to use, quoting Mao Zedong, but
let 100 space stations fly, maybe.
Well, I think right, and this will be a it's interesting in the sense that any new industry which is created, not any but most, you end up early in the stage of having a lot of different companies involved in it, creating different innovative ideas, and at some point it becomes obvious what the dominant design is going to be and what's going to make money in this space. And so if you're an early mover, you want to create that dominant design so you can build a position. Another strategy, of course, is sitting back and waiting till the dominant design becomes clear and then just gobbling everything up. But Orbital Assembly is clearly in the business of being early to market and creating a dominant design. And what you're talking about sounds really consistent with what Orbital Reef is looking at, and I'm not that familiar with what Voyager is putting together, but I have to think that people are looking at things that are very modular and flexible. But it will be easier to move without having to go through all of the spaceflight approvals and things that you have to go through if your anchor tenant is going to be NASA. And different strategies, but that's what's beautiful about the early part of an industry is you have different strategies and you figure out which one works.
Right, exactly. Well, Andy, we're just about out of time, so I want to thank you for your participation in this chat.
Good talking with you, Jeff. Good luck with everything. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. So my guest today is Jeffrey Morris. He's an award-winning writer, director, producer, entrepreneur, and production designer, and is the founder of Future Dude Entertainment. Morris is currently in pre-production on his film Persephone. His previous film credits include the animated world-hopping adventure Parallel Man, Infinite Pursuit, and the futuristic underwater spectacular Oceanus Act 1. Jeffrey, welcome to Our Future in Space.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. So,
it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
So Jeffrey, why don't you tell us a little bit about your involvement with Orbital Assembly Corporation and why you're excited to be working with us?
Well, I think I've heard a lot about what you guys are doing pretty early on. And Rhonda Stevenson, who is one of your key leaders, she's a good friend and a colleague of mine. And, when I first heard about the concept of an actual space station, I mean, a real space station, right? I mean, yes, we have the ISS, but I'm talking about the idea of a space station that produces this an artificial gravity environment, that sort of thing. It goes all the way back to like 2001 for me, watching that as a child and seeing the space station in that and really imagining what it might be like to actually, witness being involved with being on board an actual space station like that, right? That's getting closer to simulating the kind of environments that we see on Earth. That's very, very exciting to me. And as a filmmaker, the prospect of making movies in actual space. I mean, that the focus of my production company is science fiction, and we also are trying to do realistic science fiction, believable science fiction, and we try to get the science right. Now, one of the things that's very difficult to do, you watch a lot of sci-fi shows like Star Trek, Star Wars, things like that. They just kind of skip over the whole. I guess Star Trek's got the artificial gravity thing that they really don't know how that works, but they say they have it, right? Star Wars, they don't even talk about it. It's just we're just walking around, that kind of thing. Right. And it's very typical in science fiction to just kind of skip over that. But you have a number of movies like what Apollo 13, which would be more of a docudrama, where they actually simulated this zero G, but they did that with the airplanes and the parabola, right? That kind of thing, right? So so it was really interesting to see that sort of production. But the idea to me to be able to go up into space and actually shoot zero G in a zero G environment, to actually build a set and then take the components up to orbit, and then actually construct it, put it together, and put your actors in there. And then you never have to worry about trying to simulate, the way we have to do it now is you put people on wires, which can get very dangerous and very tedious. And it's also, it's expensive, and then also you're creating computer generated elements. So say, for example, you want to make it seem like they're floating around. You put them on wires, and then maybe you create a computer generated element that's floating around with them that they grab, and it can kind of look sort of, fake, so the idea of being able to do it for real is phenomenal. Not to mention the fact that, being up there and being able to capture views of the Earth or capture views of real stars, stars, and not you're not just generating everything in a computer or with art. You're actually capturing the real environment. That's a tremendous opportunity. So I'm really excited about it. The idea of being able to go up and do research, just research for a film. Let's say you're going to produce something on the surface and everything, but you still your traditional science fiction film. But to be able to take your actors up and say, all right, you're going to go up here and we're going to experience this. And, can you imagine how much that would inform their performance? how much better.
Oh yes, I can.
So,
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's sort of like really living the character in an extra dimension.
Right. And it's one of those things that actors struggle with. I mean, it's especially in something like science fiction, you run into a lot of sort of look at this tennis ball, and that's the monster, that's the thing and they have to pretend a lot, right?
Right.
Right. And to be able to say, no, you don't have to look at the tennis ball. We're actually going to go up and we're really going to see this. We're really going to experience it. I think it'd be a whole new era of filmmaking and production. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, we're really happy to be playing a part in that future potential. So, yeah, I mean, maybe you can just elaborate a little bit. You had started talking about the need for artificial gravity, that it's something that is kind of almost done as an aside for a lot of sci-fi, and we would really have it. Why is having a gravity environment important for the filmmaking process, in your view, in space, that is?
Well, are you saying? Let's clarify the question. Are you saying that in terms of the actual within the stories, like a Star Trek, that having artificial gravity in the story?
Well,
what do you?
I'll rephrase the question. I'll ask it again. But what I'm trying to say is, for you as a filmmaker, you see the potential for being able to film movies on our space station, which has both microgravity and partial gravity capabilities.
Right.
Why is having access to both of those types of environments important to you?
Well, I think the realism, that's the number one thing. It's just being able to be realistic and actually, I mean, it's funny as you talk about it, I start imagining some of the things that you could probably come up with, especially in a microgravity environment, where maybe there are things you could do where it's, instead of doing visual effects, you're capturing things in camera. Right. So the idea of being able to actually, it's not simulated, you're actually depicting reality. So it's more like you're taking your elements, your actors, your props, your sets, and then you're putting them in this real environment. And then they're acting as characters, but the environment's not. It's really the environment's doing it for you.
Right.
Instead of,
No special effects needed.
No special effects needed. Right. Exactly. And again, as I was saying, those effects are very expensive, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, but quite often it doesn't look believable. I mean, I'll give you an example. When you're trying to simulate zero gravity, you have the issue of hair. Right. Okay. And there are times where there've been movies where they were trying to depict someone in zero gravity, and they'll actually have them wear like a cap to hold their hair, their real hair, to their head, and then they'll add computer generated hair to float around and drift around.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Because you can't really do it.
You can't really do it. Right. So what would you do? You put them underwater. Well, then they're underwater, and then you got bubbles, and then you've got all those issues, and you can't talk, and it's a mess, right? So the idea. And actually in Persephone, I'm trying to depict zero gravity, but one of the things that I'm doing is I'm having the astronauts wear Snoopy caps. So by wearing a Snoopy cap, we don't have to worry about this issue of the hair, right?
Right.
Well, gosh, if I could take them up and bring my set pieces up to the space station, I could have them float around and have their hair float around. You know what I mean? It's like it would just be part of the normal environment. So, and like I said, I think the other thing for me is, gosh, I have to write my stories right now based upon the limitations of the reality of the production. And I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to actually write a movie and go, oh, hey, I can go up in orbit and shoot this. Well, what would I write? Right? It's just completely, my imagination, goes and you start to run wild, because you go, my gosh, I could actually do this. What would I do? So that's really exciting. And the idea that I could really get a sense from collaborating with you guys about, what is the environment like up there? What are the actual technical specifications? What are the elements that I'm working with? And then being able to work within those parameters, just like I have to do on Earth, right? I have a studio space, for example.
Yeah. Everything's constrained.
Right. Everything's constrained, right? So like, what's the size of my studio space, and what can I get in there? What can I, all those elements. So I would do that exact same thing. I'm planning to do that same thing with you guys to collaborate and figure out how do we get the most bang for the buck, and how do we get the most creative opportunities? And then being able to, as I said, as a writer, to be, once I know those constraints, to be able to be unleashed to create within those parameters. It's very exciting.
No, I can. Your excitement is contagious. It's really it's really apparent. So I'm picturing you going up to our station and using the zero-G environment to do a lot of the filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
Can you have you thought about as a theatrical element, as part of the storytelling, using the partial gravity environment for some of the scenes that you might envision in a future production, or is that more just for the astronaut? Or
no, I think that no, absolutely. I think the partial gravity. I mean, just the ability to have an actor, let's say, here's your quarters on a spaceship that has a similar parameter, right? The similar, centrifugal force sort of, you know what I mean, right? So you're depicting that in the movie, but then they could go look out the window, and it's really what's out the window.
Right. It's really right? The Earth's really turning around.
It's really turning around. And it's, again, it's not a visual effect, right? It's and again, I can't even imagine performance wise, the sense of awe and the sense of wonder that the actors would have, and being able to depict that and being able to see that in their eyes. That's different. Like I said, it's all acting when you're on the ground and you're pretending you're on a space station. If you're on a real space station, I almost think there'd be another challenge, which is, hey guys, remember to act. Right. I mean, the idea that they'd be so excited about it. I think that's definitely a possibility too. So yeah.
I'm thinking about Tom Cruise, and I don't know the latest plans, but I have heard that he has booked a ticket to go up and shoot part of a movie on the ISS.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how that experience might compare to the space station that we hope to have in orbit in a few years' time, and how, shooting a movie on the ISS might be different from
I have thought a ton about that. I mean, the thing is, again, you guys are building. See, the ISS. Gosh, I think it's an amazing technical achievement, and I think it's important that it's there. But in a lot of ways, right, it's serving so many different purposes, right? And you can tell when you look, at the interior spaces, right? It looks like a lot of just stuff. Right. I mean, all these cables and wires and cabinets and console. Everything's just kind of in a jumble, right? There's so many, right. It
looks like my graduate student lab.
Right. There
wires everywhere.
Wires everywhere and all this stuff. And you really don't. It doesn't feel like anything that's aesthetically designed at all. It feels like it's technically designed to serve the purpose of having astronauts do experiments up in orbit. Okay, great, right? The thing that I love about your design is it's actually beautiful. There's a beauty to it. There's an aesthetic. There's a thought process behind it. You guys actually can take the engineering and the understanding of everything that's come before, and then package it in such a way that it actually is appealing and beautiful, and then the idea. So to me, I mean, they're going to make a movie, but it's going to be stuck in the constraints of that ISS environment, right?
Right.
So there's only what are they going to do? It's like you can't bring up like set pieces up there and shove them in or whatever.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, you're constrained to whatever the environment is, and I think with you guys, not only is it a beautiful environment to begin with, but then also being able to say, all right, we want to intentionally be able to work within this to be able to bring retrofittable components that we could add or change things or make it, it could look so futuristic and beautiful and clean and artistic. And that's the thing that I can't imagine them being able to pull off with shooting on the ISS. It's not a pretty place, This is my book,
I'm sure it's going to be heavily reliant on CG, for all the backgrounds. It's really just about the floating effect. And then, I almost wonder if it's just because they want to say that they actually filmed it in space.
I think it's more of a shtick, I think it's more of a trope in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, Tom Cruise, it's like he did a halo jump. He did this, he did that. Now he's in space. That's what it kind of feels like.
It's almost like it's on his bucket list, right?
Right. Nothing against Tom. I actually think Tom is very impressive, and I think he's done some really cool stuff. And I'm very excited to see Top Gun and see what the idea that the way they made that film is pretty cool. So, and I'm thinking they must be planning to do similar things on the ISS, but it's going to be the ISS. That's
Right.
that's the idea, right? With you guys, to me, it's a completely different game, and Tom's going to regret it. He's going to be like, oh, I should have, when he sees what you guys built.
Yeah. Well, he'll come up next, maybe.
Yeah,
So,
right. So,
no, I'm just so excited. I mean, again, your excitement is contagious, and I'm imagining what it will be like to be able to dedicate like a whole module to your set, having all of these components that sort of really to turn it into something else, right? Like we've already created this idea of what it will be. You're going to transform it for however many weeks, it would be that that you need to get what you are needing to do. And, also that the actors are hopefully going to have a couple of days to just sort of get used to what it's like being in space, which I'm sure will be, permanently altering to their perception.
Yes.
The world.
It's almost like, kind of the last thing I'll say about it. Think about, it's always funny when I think about like the Jurassic Park films, and we're showing these dinosaurs running around, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be an approximation of what we think dinosaurs looked like and what we think dinosaurs did, right? I mean, if we could have a time machine and go back and see dinosaurs, we might go, oh my gosh, that didn't look like that at all, right?
Purple feathers or something.
Yeah, right. They didn't move like that at all. They didn't, and I understand the science behind, the extrapolations. There's a thought process there. I get it. But by the same token, it's still not the same as seeing the real thing, and we never will, right? If you think about it, I'm using this as sort of a metaphor to talk about what it's like to try to depict space. You got all these artists and writers and directors and authors, and everybody's trying to figure out what would it really be like, and we're all trying to explain it, and we're all trying. And if we're lucky, we get to talk to real astronauts, maybe, and ask them questions, stuff like that. But to really experience it is going to be a completely different thing. And I'm assuming that the real experience is going to be just like what I'm talking about with the dinosaurs, right? It's like it's probably going to be night and day to what we think it's like.
Well, from what I've read, I've been reading The Overview Effect by Frank White, who's really one of the prime thinkers of sort of why going to space is more than just science and research. It's a catalyst for human transformation. And astronauts say that no matter what they read and prepare ahead of time, it's a completely unexpected experience once you're there, that it really is like an, sort of a mind-opening moment for them when they actually see the planet floating below them, and they're never the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a good way.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jeffrey, for your time today and sharing your inspiring vision of what entertainment in space might be like someday soon.
Absolutely.
It was a great pleasure having you.
Thank you. Pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Good luck with all your endeavors.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
Well, thank you for listening to these short interviews. I hope you found them interesting. If you have any suggestions for future discussion topics or people you'd like us to interview, just please feel free to reach out. You can email us at ourfutureinspace@orbitalassembly.com, or find us on Twitter @ourfuturespace or Facebook @ourfutureinspace.
And if you like what we're doing at OAC and would like to find ways to contribute in other ways, feel free to reach out to info@orbitalassembly.com. Thanks for listening.
This program represents the personal opinions of the hosts and their guests. The content, opinions, and views do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Orbital Assembly Corporation, nor the organizations with which any of the program participants may be affiliated. The mere appearance or promotion of this program does not constitute an endorsement by Orbital Assembly Corporation or its affiliates. Our Future in Space. Copyright 2022 Orbital Assembly Corporation. Hosts Dr. Jeff Greenblatt and Eric Ward. Audio production by Tim Alatorre. Musical theme The Last Day by Dark Blue Studio.